You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast. We are presented by BuckeyeGrove.com and, of course, by listeners like you. I am your host, Kyle Lamb. We are on an abbreviated Christmas Eve edition of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast. A few things I want to talk about today. Of course, number one, there is a new assistant sheriff in town. It's really the same as the old sheriff. We will talk about that, and also C.J. Jackson, the human roller coaster ride. He is a fun roller coaster. Quite an up and down player he is for Ohio State basketball, but the Buckeyes were 14-point winners over UCLA in the CBS Sports Classic over the weekend, and we'll talk a little Buckeye basketball later in the show as well. The lead story, though, of course, it is Urban Meyer, according to reports and confirmed by Gene Smith, will be the assistant athletic director at Ohio State going forward after the January 1st. It is definitely not June yet, or it doesn't feel like June, but after the January 1st Rose Bowl against Washington, once the Buckeyes wrap that game up and wrap their season up, Urban will be transitioning into the athletic department. And of course, it's already been reported he will be teaching a class in the Fisher School of Business this year. It'll be a leadership and character course in business school, but Urban apparently now will also be working alongside Gene Smith in the athletic department. Now, here's what I understand about this. This is a chance for Urban to work in an administrative role, and I don't think that this necessarily means that he is going to be the next athletic director at Ohio State. But that is definitely a possibility on the table. As I understand it, this is a way for him to get into the administrative side of things, and he can just kind of feel out what he wants to do going forward, because you got to understand this is a guy that really wants to coach. He's got coaching in his blood. He tried to walk away from Florida back in 2010, and it just didn't take. He's got coaching in his blood. He just couldn't stay off the sidelines. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't get back into coaching again. It doesn't mean that he's ruled it out, but I think he knows that the stress level of coaching is just too much for him right now, with his headaches being the way it is and the stress bringing that on. Coaching, and I've seen some people, ask on Twitter, well, if the headaches are a legitimate thing, if the health issue is legitimate, then why get back into a job at all? That's not going to help. But there's a different type of stress. With the job of an athletic director, this is all going to be about oversight. It's going to be about paperwork. It's going to be about negotiations. The type of stress in a daily environment working in the athletic department is just not the same as, the coaching profession. These coaches on the college football level, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, these guys are in the office for 18 hours a day. That's not an exaggeration. Sometimes 20 hours a day. Some guys even sleep in the office overnight because they're there so late. It's during the season especially. I mean, you're breaking down film, you're calling recruits all night. I mean, it is a very tiresome profession. And then there's the stress of actually going out, a pressure cooker like Ohio State especially, where you're expected to win 10, 11, 12 games a year, or else you're just not getting it done. I mean, that's a lot of pressure, and it's a very, very difficult job. So, going into the athletic department is a different type of stress. I mean, there's, any job there is going to be a little bit of stress, but I think this is a chance for Urban to stay around athletics and, just kind of feel out what he wants to do with the rest of his life. He's still a fairly young guy, relative, especially some coaches coaching into their 60s and 70s, He's still got some time left to stay around athletics. And Gene Smith, he's not going to be around much longer. I mean, the plan is, Gene, there's been talks of Gene retiring here for a couple years. I mean, it could happen any time now. And I think Gene knows that, and I think Urban knows that. So this is a chance for Urban to get his feet wet. And, the way I understand it is that he would have a chance to take over for Gene when Gene retires if this is the route he wants to go. They'll put him in the athletic department. He'll learn the business side of things. He'll learn the scheduling side, the financial aspect, get receipts and managing all the budgets and everything. And then he'll just kind of feel out. Is this something that he could see himself doing? And I think the answer is going to be yes. I think this is a way for him to stay involved without having to tempt himself to get back into the coaching industry. I think he would love to coach, but I think he knows it's just not something he should do. And this kind of keeps him away from that temptation. And look, I know there are some people worried, well, is he going to tamper with the program? No, Ryan Day is going to be the head football coach. Urban will just be, a couple offices away. Urban will have a chance to speak with Day at times. Day will have a chance to consult Urban when he wants information, when he wants advice. These two will talk. Certainly Urban will be there as an ear for Ryan Day and somebody to bounce off ideas. But Urban is not going to meddle. This is Ryan Day's program now. So, yeah, I think Urban will get a chance to learn the business side of things. And I think if all goes well, and this is something he enjoys, I think Urban Meyer could very well be the next athletic director at Ohio State. And look, some people wondered, well, is Urban cut out to be an athletic director? I think so. Look at it this way. I think Urban, one of the things that has made him so successful as a head football coach is he's meticulous, he's organized, he has great leadership qualities. He can see, and not just him, but he can see leadership qualities in other people. He's been able to have so many great assistant football coaches throughout his career because he can recognize hard workers, he can recognize, quality people, he can recognize guys that are natural born leaders. And so I could see Urban being a very successful athletic director in the future because I think he's going to see the leadership qualities that would make, a great baseball coach or a great women's volleyball coach, a great, hockey coach, track and field coach. I think he would be great at learning, or I think he'd be great at hiring people, managing personnel, because that's what he's always done well throughout his football career. And the business side can be learned, as far as, managing a budget and, managing personnel within the athletic department, scheduling games, all the financial concerns that come on the basketball side of scheduling, the football side of scheduling, all those things can be learned. And I think that's something that Urban is going to have to figure out over the next year or two, whenever it is Gene decides to retire. That's going to be a chance for Urban Meyer to learn the ropes on the administrative business side of big-time collegiate athletics. And I think it's something he'll pick up. And I could definitely see Urban Meyer being the next athletic director sometime within the next couple of years. What's really interesting to me is there is a scenario that I could see playing out where Urban Meyer, and I said this on Twitter, I said it somewhat jokingly. there was a bit of truth when I said it, but I said last week, a couple of days back anyway, that there is a scenario where I could see Urban Meyer being the next athletic director at Ohio State and Jim Tressel being the next president at Ohio State. And that would just be a tremendously amazing scenario to play out for so many reasons. First and foremost, it would just make the media at large just totally melt down. It would make Michigan fans totally blow its gasket. The outrage to see Urban Meyer as an athletic director and Jim Tressel as a president at Ohio State would be surreal. But look, I don't pretend that I understand the politics involved when it comes to universities and trustees looking for presidents of a college university. I don't understand that process. I don't understand always what they're looking for. What makes a qualified candidate? Is it, teaching experience? Is it, having an academic background? Is it a business background? Is it a little bit of both? I can't pretend that I understand what they're looking for. But I will tell you this, Jim Tressel is now a sitting president at a mid-sized university within the state of Ohio. And in the first couple of years on the job, I can tell you, from everything I've heard, the folks up there in Youngstown think that Jim Tressel has done a fantastic job at Youngstown State. And I don't know if that makes him qualified to be the next president of Ohio State. But here's what I do know. I know that Michael Drake is on thin ice. I think he's in a tenuous position where there is some concern over some things he's handled, and not so much necessarily from a presidential side on the academic side of things, but how he handled the band incident, how he handled the Urban Meyer situation. There aren't many people in Michael Drake's corner right now. And I don't know that he's going to be fired, but I will say this, it would not shock me. From what I understand, it would just not shock me if he were bought out within the next couple of years. He was extended till 2021, but that was last year. But I could see him possibly moving on to something else before 2021. Whether that's next year or the year after, I don't know. But I'm not sure that Michael Drake is long for this job. And if it comes down to a situation where Ohio State is looking for its next president, do I think that everybody in that board, the board of trustees, do I think every single person is going to be in the corner of Jim Tressel? No, probably not. Remember, this is, although a different makeup, this is the same group in general that did terminate Jim Tressel back in 2011. And those people that are there now are not the ones that fired Jim Tressel as head football coach. But in general, there is some concern. I think that would be an obstacle. When you're looking to hire the president of the university, ideally you're not going to want to hire somebody that's already been fired in another position by you in the past. But I don't think that alone would stop. There are still some people that would not take him because he doesn't come from the academic background. He hasn't been a professor. And like I said, I don't understand the politics of that, but I know it's probably an issue. But you look at just leadership qualities and character, and I think a directional approach to managing a university like he's doing right now in Youngstown, where he's just so revered, I think that is something that there would be some support to hire Jim Tressel as president, because let's be honest here, whatever you think of him as a president or his lack of experience on the academic side of the ledger, there is no question the financial side, it would be a home run. Jim Tressel is president of the United States. Yeah, let's make Jim Tressel president of the United States. I'm actually all for that. But Jim Tressel as president of the university would bring in just an insane amount of contributions and annual giving to the university. I think the donations would skyrocket. Fundraising would be a breeze. If Urban Meyer were athletic director and Jim Tressel were president, both academic and athletic contributions would be at levels I don't think the university has ever seen. I think there would just be so much public support with the alumni base and donors especially. It would be a crazy thing to see. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here. We don't know Urban Meyer is going to be next athletic director. We definitely don't know Jim Tressel is going to be the next president. And it's just kind of fun to talk about. It's almost Christmas, and that for me would be a Christmas miracle. I think that would be amazing to see because, it's not just about football. I know people would say, well, just because they're great football coaches doesn't mean they make great athletic directors or make great presidents. And that's true, but in this case, I actually think both of them would be very good at those jobs. Jim Tressel is a president right now. He's president of Youngstown State University. And Urban Meyer right now is just now getting into the administrative side of things, or he will after January 1st. But he has the qualities to be a great athletic director. And I think because these two individuals have done so much for the university, not just on the field, not just in terms of wins, but being exemplary leaders. And I know the haters out there, are trying to hold the Zach Smith stuff to Urban Meyer and show it being a character flaw. But anybody that knows Urban Meyer knows that that's just not him, okay? He got a bad rap in all of that. And Jim Tressel got a bad rap in Tattoo-gate. Because I tell you, what Jim Tressel did was really, really minor in the grand scheme of things. He was trying to honor a legal process that was out of his hands and didn't arbitrarily report something because he felt the law was more important than NCAA policy in that moment. And I got to say there's more to that, and I'm not going to rehash, I'm not going to cry over spilled milk. I'm not going to rehash old stuff here. But that wasn't all on Jim Tressel. There was more involvement there and more reasons why that didn't happen, and he kind of fell on the sword a little bit. I think I'm making myself clear without making myself too clear. If you catch my wink, you catch my drip there. But that alone, Jim Tressel, he had so much loyalty to this university and still does. He still bleeds scarlet and gray. And so that's why I think in this case, it's not just about football. It's not just about what Jim Tressel did as a coach. It's about the fact he is one of the most amazing guys you'll ever meet. I've got a little story I want to tell you because this is just, for me, this is something that really highlights the kind of individual that Jim Tressel is. And he has a way of making people special. And I know there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people out there with stories like this. Probably many of you that have met Jim Tressel have a similar story. But I remember back in 2004, I was, covering Ohio State basketball at the time and with another publication, okay? And I was attending the Thad Matta press conference announcing him as the next head basketball coach. This was June in 2004. And so let me backtrack a second here. Actually, in February of 2002, I was attending a high school coaches convention up in New Albany, and Jim Tressel was one of the guest speakers there. It's the annual event that they have, and they bring in a bunch of college and high school, or they bring in a bunch of college and NFL coaches to speak at these conventions to high school coaches around the state, okay? And Jim Tressel was the keynote speaker that year. And I was there covering the event, and I got to speak to him for a little bit. It's like 10 minutes, and we stopped recording, and he was asking me some questions, very friendly, asking me where I was from, asking me about my family, what my mom and dad did for a living, that sort of thing. And I was young at the time, and it was really, I was really appreciative that Jim took such care and such time into, finding out about me. It would be easy for me to ask him a bunch of questions, but here he was, just a human, trying to learn about my life and where I come from. And I was really appreciative of that. So fast forward to June 2004, and I had not spoken with him in a year and a half, okay? It had been a long time. I think, maybe it was either I think it may have been 2003 at the coaches convention, but I can't remember. It had been at least a year and a half since I had seen him. So I'm sitting there waiting on this press conference to start, and I get a tap on my shoulder, and I hear the words, "Kyle, is this seat taken?" And then I look down, and there's open seat next to me, and it's Jim Tressel. And I'm like, "It is now, Coach." And so he sits down, and he proceeds to start asking me about my dad, and he remembered my dad's name. He remembered where I was from, and he's asking me all these questions. And he had remembered everything about me based on one 10-minute conversation from nearly 2 years prior to that. It really underscores the type of person that Jim Tressel is. He has a photographic memory. He remembers details and things about people that you just don't normally remember. And that is something that makes Jim Tressel special. And that's why, I have always held this guy in such esteem because, he's a guy that, he personally responds to his emails. He personally writes letters, for fan mail. He'll go make these appearances for people. How many people in a given week when he was Ohio State head football coach would email Jim Tressel and say, I have a kid sick in the hospital. It means so much to him if you come by. He probably gets that request, dozens and dozens and dozens of times in a given week, right? And he fulfilled so many of those requests despite how busy, he must have been as head football coach. And that is why Jim Tressel would be a perfect president for Ohio State. It's not just about the football. And as great as it would be to see Jim Tressel, former football coach, back at Ohio State, it would be great because he would be great for the Ohio State University. Urban Meyer, next athletic director, Jim Tressel, next president, that is a concept that I would get behind. It would be fun to see the meltdown. The media would hate it. They would have a field day blasting it. But when push comes to shove, we're talking about two guys who mean a lot to this university on and off the field. And so that is my Christmas wish for 2018 as far as Ohio State is concerned. Long way to go. Who knows how this is going to play out. Michael Drake could end up being president for many years. Gene Smith may not retire for many years. I don't know how this is going to play out, but I'm just saying the possibilities are, in fact, endless.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
A few show notes here before we wrap it up with some Ohio State basketball talk. First and foremost here, coming up within one of the next two shows, I will have Tony Castricone. He is the radio play-by-play voice of the Washington Huskies. If you recognize that name, it is because he is a former Central Ohio broadcaster. He worked at WBNS Radio, 1460 The Fan for several years. He is also a graduate of Ohio University. So Tony Castricone I hope to have on here either on Friday or the following Monday to preview the Ohio State-Washington game. And I also hope to have on Daniel and Josh of SECfans.com. Of course, you remember those two. They were on previewing the Ohio State-Michigan game with their computer modeling. I know some of you want to jokingly ask them why their model did not get Ohio State's score correct, as their model definitely did not predict Ohio State's score 62 on Michigan. But to be fair, I'm not sure anybody saw that coming. Their model actually was pretty close on the number of points that Michigan would score. I think they had 34, and Michigan wound up with 39. So that was kind of in the ballpark. But Ohio State obviously going well above and beyond the expectations that anyone or any model would have predicted for a number of points scored against Michigan. So, like I said, I hope to preview the Rose Bowl here coming up in the next two shows. Tony Castricone as well as Daniel and Josh with SEC fans. And we'll also get into some modeling of the college football playoff on top of the Ohio State-Washington situation. So that will be coming up on Friday and Monday shows respectively. And another show note, so you may remember last month, I believe it was late October, when I had Corey Thompson and Johnny Lunsford. They are hosts of the Scarlet and Great podcast. We did a special roundtable with them, and we talked about Ohio State. Well, it is my privilege, and I've already said this on Twitter, but I would like to say it here. So Johnny and Corey will actually be coming over to the Unscripted Ohio podcast feed. Now, this will be a separate show. It will still continue to be the Scarlet and Great podcast. It will continue to be labeled and numbered differently than the Unscripted Ohio podcast. But what this means for you is basically more content in the same place. If you already follow the Unscripted Ohio podcast, then you will not have to do anything differently. You will still continue to hear myself and Ross and Kirk and all the guests that we have here on Unscripted Ohio. You'll continue to hear us every Monday and Friday, but this just means that on your medium of choice, whether that's iTunes or SoundCloud or Google Play or Stitcher, or whether you watch us or listen to us on BuckeyeGrove.com, Corey and Johnny's podcast will also be on our feed, so you'll be able to catch their show probably either every Tuesday or every Wednesday. We're still deciding on a final day on that, but it'll be every Tuesday or Wednesday on the Unscripted Ohio podcast feed. So that just means another show that you'll be able to listen to during your work week, and that will begin as of January 2nd or 3rd, I believe. So the first Tuesday or Wednesday after the new year, they will have their show up, and we'll import all of their past shows as well, so you can catch up to speed if you would like to. But so Corey and Johnny of the Unscripted Ohio podcast, or of the Scarlet and Gray podcast, will be coming to the Unscripted Ohio feed. We're very excited about that. In the future, that'll allow some future cross-promotional stuff. They'll make some appearances on the show. I'll make some appearances on their show. We'll promote each other's shows. And then the possibility is there for expansion too. We have some long-term plans that I hope to implement in the future, and this allows us to give us a little more of a base to work with. So very excited about the Scarlet and Gray podcast. Corey and Johnny coming to the Unscripted Ohio feed after the new year. Very excited about that. So Ohio State basketball, let's talk about this here real quick before we wrap it up. The Buckeyes were 80-66 winners over UCLA on Saturday. It was very, very touch and go in the first half, a very ugly first half for Ohio State. It was starting to look like, there for a while, you just wonder if they were going to be able to pull that out because of how poorly they were attacking the zone. And you got to give UCLA credit because, look, they're not a zone team traditionally. Steve Alford, prefers man defense, but he kind of has a situation where they just were unable to defend anybody with the guys they had. So they went to this 2-3 zone out of necessity, and it worked out well for them, I thought, in this game. They still gave up 80 points when it was all said and done, which goes to show how big of an issue they are having defensively right now. But at the same time, I think because of their length and because of their athleticism, a 2-3 zone could work out for them this year. They're in a very weak conference. The Pac-12 is just absolutely horrible from top to bottom. Arizona State is the only team worth anything in that league right now. And so I think UCLA has to go to the 2-3 zone, and they have to use that to try to be successful defensively. Look, this is a situation, they're a little bit like Syracuse because of that length, and they're built to be able to do this 2-3 zone better than I think the man defense was working for them. It's a concern that Ohio State was unable to attack it. The length really impacted not only, shots, it was impacting their shots, especially inside, but it was really disrupting passing lanes. There was a lot of deflections, a lot of weak passes, lazy passes. But you got to give Ohio State a ton of credit for how they attacked the zone in the second half. They came out, really got the ball into the corner, and then were able to get Caleb Wesson posting up in the low post on the block, and he was getting guys sealed and going to the rim. That was really a big change from the first half where they were trying to get him the ball in the high post in the middle, and it just wasn't working. So Ohio State changed up their attack in the second half. It really worked. They got into a rhythm. And a big reason they got into a rhythm was the play of C.J. Jackson. Now, what can you say about C.J. Jackson? I said it early in the show. He is a human roller coaster ride. It's really crazy the extreme ups and downs he has from game to game, from half to half even, from play to play. He's really erratic. And to be fair to C.J., part of this is not his fault. He's not a go-to guy by nature. He's talented enough to be a very good player for Ohio State. He is a very good player for Ohio State, but he's not a go-to guy. But because Ohio State is in a situation where, especially in the backcourt, they're very young and inexperienced right now. Dwayne Washington, Luther Muhammad, these are guys that can be go-to guys and key players for Ohio State going forward, but they're just not there yet. They're not ready to take over consistently the task and the obligation of being 15, 16, 17-point scorers a game. And so CJ, I think, is in a situation where, A, he knows he's needed, but B, I don't think he recognizes his own limitations. And I think that is a bigger problem than CJ's limitations themselves. I think that he doesn't recognize his ability and his limitation. And sometimes I think he tries to take some shots that are contested and he shouldn't be taking. I think he tries to force passes that shouldn't be forced. And that really leads to some of the head-scratching moments you see from C.J. Jackson. We saw it for basically 38 minutes against Creighton, and then all of a sudden, after being 0 of 6 or 0 of 7 from the field, he makes the last couple plays of the game and really helps Ohio State win that. Same thing with UCLA. If you had walked away at halftime of this UCLA game, seeing C.J. Jackson's first half, I can only imagine. I know some of you told me on Twitter, that you did do this, but if you walked away at halftime and then came back later that evening and saw the box score, it probably blew your mind. C.J. Jackson, 22 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, because it wound up being an extremely good game for Jackson, and you would have never guessed it because the first half he looked like a train wreck, to put it bluntly. There's just no way around it. He had a really rough first half, but this is why Chris Holtmann is going to keep sticking with him, because no matter how erratic C.J. Jackson is, Chris Holtmann needs Keyshawn Woods and C.J. Jackson to be at their best for as frequently as they can, okay? This team has a chance to put together a really good season. It has its ups and downs, has some inconsistency. It's not there yet, but we're looking at a team, if they beat High Point on Saturday, you're looking at a team that will finish 2018 at 12-1. And when you saw the schedule in the offseason, I don't think there's a person here listening to this podcast, and myself included, by the way, I don't think there's a person in the world that looked at that schedule and said, yeah, they'll be 12-1 at this point. I would have said, I probably would have said 3 or 4 losses at this point in the season if I were looking at it. You could have maybe argued for 2, but I would have said 3, 4. Some of you might have said 5 or 6. And they're in a position now at 12-1. They've already got a 2-0 head start in the Big Ten. 18 more Big Ten games to go. Let's be really conservative and say they go 9-9. It is a really tough Big Ten, by the way. So a 9-9 is still kind of a tall order for a lot of teams. But let's say they go 9-9 on top of 12-1. You're looking at a 21-win Ohio State basketball team. If they wind up going 10-8 or 11-7, well, then all of a sudden you're looking at 25-plus wins. And I think that is a realistic possibility for this Ohio State team. But they need Jackson to continue playing well, and it is amazing that he can really turn it on after having such a bad first half or a bad first 38 minutes against Creighton, and then make the plays that he does down the stretch. And that's a mark of a guy that you have to respect. And it's not his fault he's in a position where he needs to make these plays, because next year, Ohio State will have plenty of options. DJ Carton will come in as a freshman, and he'll be really good for Ohio State, but he won't have to be every night because they'll have C.J. Walker, the transfer from Florida State, playing. They'll have another year of experience for Luther Muhammad and Dwayne Washington, Kyle Young, Caleb Wesson, Andre Wesson. All these guys, they'll have so much experience, they won't need DJ Carton to be a stud every night at point guard. But right now, C.J. Jackson has a little more pressure on him. If he understands his limitations and plays within those limitations, yeah, he's not a true go-to guy. He's not a great ball handler. He's not the guy that you would like to see, but that's not his fault. He can be really good for what he is. He just has to play within himself. This Ohio State basketball team, if they're going to go places this year, if they're going to have a chance to be in the Big Ten race down the stretch, if they're going to have a chance to have a high seed and play into the second weekend of the NCAA tournament or beyond, it's going to need to be because C.J. Jackson and Keyshawn Woods are playing their best more consistently than they have been. Those two guys are really good when they're playing well, but they just need to bring it more consistently. So Jackson is a interesting case to watch. He is definitely a roller coaster ride. But look, the guy had a great second half after being a disaster in the first half. And this Ohio State basketball team, it was a good win on the road. Not a great win. UCLA has not been great. They got crushed by Cincinnati. They have not been a great basketball team this year, but it's still a really good win from the standpoint Ohio State was able to get things together in the second half and make the plays down the stretch to pull away and win that game convincingly. So Buckeyes are getting it done. We will talk more Ohio State basketball, of course, after next week. Most of the next two shows, as I said, are going to be previewing Ohio State Washington in the Rose Bowl. I hope to have Tony Castricone as well as Daniel and Josh of FCCFans.com to preview the Rose Bowl coming up. So should be a lot of fun, and Mark and Kirk will be back next week as we recap what happened in the Rose Bowl. So thank you for listening to me. As I said, after January 1st, we will have Corey and Johnny coming up of Scarlet and Great. They will be on the feed, so you'll be able to listen to them every Tuesday or Wednesday, as well as Monday and Friday Unscripted Ohio podcasts. You can catch Unscripted Ohio every Monday and Friday, as I said. Catch it on BuckeyeGrove.com or on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. Catch me on Twitter, everybody, at KYLam8. I hope you have a great Christmas. We'll be back again on Friday to begin looking at the Rose Bowl and beyond. It's been great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good holiday.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.